Hey, welcome back to night 2 of our online marriage retreat that we're calling Just the Two of Us.
Tonight we're going to look at the Bible passages around the fall. Now last week we looked at God's creation for marriage. Now we're going to see where marriage gets broken. So if you are with your spouse tonight, this is designed for you. We've got some questions at the end for you guys to watch together, either tonight with us or later whenever it fits. But this is a great time for some good marriage conversations, and that's what it's designed for. So those questions will be at the end as we get going. All right, now if you missed session 1, we looked at how God's intention for marriage is that we would find freedom in marriage, we would be honoring of each other in marriage, and that ultimately we would flourish in marriages. Marriage is good. It's God's gift for our flourishing.
Mm-hmm. We talked about how men and women were created as allies. It's God's good creation. Marriage is God's gift. Like each other, equal but different.
So tonight we're going to look at Genesis 3, starting in verse 5. And Trish, you're going to read that for us.
When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he walked through the garden in the cool of the day. And they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" He answered, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" The man said, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it." Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate it." Then we're going to skip a couple verses down to where it talks about the curse. To the woman he said, "I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." To Adam he said, "Because you have listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all of the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food, until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return."
This is a terrible story. It's the story of the first disobedience of humanity and how we disobeyed God's boundaries and how we marred his good gift. And then we get to the curse. And so it's the story of the human condition to hide and of sin and deception and blaming. And then we get to the curse of the consequences that we experience in life because of our sin. And so one of the things that happens there is that marriage, rather than being God's gift, is experienced, which is still God's gift and still going to be filled, but it's also experienced in brokenness. It's broken at times, and it has sin has some very specific implications for marriage. So in some ways, this story is a sadly humorous example of human relationships that we all know and experience. Think about it. The man and the woman are together. They eat the forbidden fruit, and they quickly realize it was not as desirable as they thought, that they've been deceived. I don't know if you ever bought something that, this is, life-changing blender or something, and it just doesn't work out. Well, we do that as humans too. And so they realize that they're naked and they hide that shame and guilt, whereas before they were open before each other, open before God. Right. Now there's shame and guilt, and that these things are not part of God's good creation. This guilt and shame threaten the freedom that God blessed them with. And so the blame game begins. Listen to this. Listen to this guy talk back to God. He says, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it."
Everybody else but me.
Who's at fault? It's the blame game, right? Sin comes in, we're going to blame everybody else.
Yep.
The woman gave me the fruit. I just ate it. And really, God, this woman who was your gift, you're the one who gave her to me that messed all this up. So really, it's on you.
It's actually your fault.
Yeah, the first abdication of responsibility. Now, the woman's not much better, right? She says, oh, the serpent deceived me and I ate. So she does this same blame game abdication.
She finds another person to add to the mix, yeah.
And so this story leads to what's called the curse. And that's the account of why the world is the way it is. And so specifically when it comes to marriage, there's implications for the earth, there's implications for the serpent, and then there's implications for the man and the woman. But for marriage, it says this. It says, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Or another translation, this is God saying to the woman, and for your man shall be your longing, and he shall rule over you. So that's a pretty big phrase there, right? This desire, this rule, that is a different concept of marriage than we've seen so far. What does that look like?
So what words would you say now characterize this relationship versus before? I think before there was mutuality, and now we're dealing with hierarchy. Before there was freedom, and now they're shameful and they feel guilty. Before there was honoring, and now marriages are a competition.
Right, there's this power.
There's a power struggle. Yeah. There was flourishing, and now there's protecting.
Like protecting yourself.
Of oneself
right?
from your spouse.
Because you can't trust as completely.
Right. There's striving and strife and power struggle. There's blame, shame, guilt, hiddenness.
And what is lost in these two little verses in the story of sin is intimacy, togetherness, connection. And so the question is, do you want a marriage that's marked by intimacy and this alliance we talked about, going through life together? Mm-hmm. Or by one that's marked by competition and isolation and power struggle? Because that's what marriage under the curse, that's what this prescription does. It undoes this goodness that God intended where the man was alone, and so God made him not alone. But now in marriage, we still experience aloneness, and we experience this strife and separateness. It's almost like we're on separate islands, shooting things at each other at times. This hierarchy, this competition, rather than this alliance of rowing a boat in the same direction. Yeah. Or what would you? So how is the marriage we experience reflective of either God's creation of this mutuality? That's what we're leaning into, moving toward. Yeah. But we also acknowledge that there's places of brokenness that we experience too. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to talk about theologically what we must say now, because this curse that we experience is not God's intention for marriage. Right. It's not at all. Right. This is what marriage under the sinful conditions look like. And so as Christians, we're not bound by the sinful condition of marriage. We're new people. We're renewed. We're the colony of heaven here on earth. We're called to live into Jesus' ethics and values.
To take off the old self.
The worldly self. The worldly self is what this marriage looks like, this competition marriage. And what's interesting is entire strands of church history and teaching have kind of taken this broken marriage and said, oh, this is... have baptized it, for lack of better terms.
To be celebrated.
That we should celebrate the hierarchy and the strife and the not honoring each other fully or not flourishing fully. That's what it's supposed to look like, which is a complete reversal of what the Bible is telling us. That this man ruling over women that we see in history, that's not God's intent. Or women being subservient. This is the effect of sin. This is not God's design. So think about this. Think about all the other effects, and this is to prove my point, right? Think about all the other effects of the curse that we just read about. Yeah. What are some of the effects of the curse that we read about?
So, pains in childbirth.
Are we content just to allow pain in childbirth?
I mean, there are those brave women who, want it. I thought I could handle this, right? But, I got the medicine, right? And it was available to me because we tried to alleviate that pain.
And we don't just say, well, God made it this way, so you just have to have faith. Same thing with hard labor. The ground is not as fruitful. It's not as easy. So do we just say, well, it's tough? No, we invent technology to make it easier. Yeah.
So like thorns and thistles, the creation is no longer our friend, but is treated as a threat. So we tame it. There's tons of ways that we actually poison the earth to try to tame the thorns and the thistles. we work against that. Even if there is no poison involved, we're still going to work against it. I still have blackberry bushes in the back that I yank out every year, and I'm trying to tame it.
But we're all afraid of the earth. It's not only our friend. It threatens us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Death itself.
So death enters in because of the curse. We're not
resist
okay with
that.
death. We resist death. So then why is it when it comes to hierarchy in marriage that we say, oh, we shouldn't resist this, but actually, oh, this is God's design.
Like, let's embrace the
Let's
last
embrace
one.
the curse. No, that's not how it works. It doesn't make any sense at all. So, and the man shall rule over you, and you will desire him. We need to resist this one. This is not part of God's intention. This is the curse. This is the brokenness. So this new state of male dominance is representative not of God's how it's supposed to be, God's prescription, if you will, but of the deterioration of the human condition. And it's a result of our defiance with God, not our walking with God well. So just thinking, as you read the Bible or hear teaching or think about marriage, now we've got two categories. On the one side, we've got creation, God's desire and intent. On the other, we've got the effects of sin. So everything else then gets viewed through this. Does this reflect God's created design of mutuality, togetherness, goodness that's good? Or is it now competition, strife, isolation, separateness, power struggle? Right. We've got two broad categories to read the rest of the Bible, to think about our marriages through. So think about this, taking it out of the Bible, think about this in our cultural context. There's a lot of all of our marriage jokes that we laugh at are funny, are maybe because of this.
They're like kind of funny.
Yeah, they're kind of funny.
Or maybe they were funny at one point, but maybe they don't feel very funny anymore. I don't know. Like there's one that was made popular, at least in a movie, right? That says that the man is the head of the household, right? But the woman is the neck and can move the head wherever she wants.
Right, and that's reflective of
manipulative.
Who's really in charge,
woman.
right? It's joking about this power struggle that is all too familiar. Or another one, with our daughters and sons, the Disney princess syndrome. How would you describe that?
I think that there were Disney movies that were made when I was growing up that painted the picture that all women, those tender little women, they needed a strong man to come and to make their decisions for them, or to
Yes.
to help them survive. Like in every aspect, they needed that strong man to help them.
Yeah.
And I think, to be fair, that Disney is changing their tune some. But there is that model, not just at Disney, right? But there's that model of just be still, quiet. You might even be asleep and just wait patiently for a man to come and save you.
Right. So we have all these cultural kind of signals or mores or that buy into this as well.
Yeah.
Rather than that, we are dignified, we honor each other, we are both God's gift for each other. And so what happens is for the male in this sinful condition, right? If this is if we're supposed to be the rulers in this relationship, right? What happens is there's kind of two options. One is that we can rule in manipulative and self-centered ways to the detriment of our wife. Right, so it can be all about us, or the second one is that we experience shame and guilt because somebody says we don't lead adequately enough. We're not ruling enough, or we're not making decisions enough, or we're not doing the manly job. I mean, whole ideas of biblical manhood are based on this. You're not manly enough, right?
I would think that it would be a lot of weight to try to hold.
It's a lot of weight. It's weight that we're not supposed to hold. Right?
No.
Yeah.
Not alone.
Not alone. Absolutely.
All right, so as women,
under this curse, right, what does this look like if we buy into this hierarchy model?
So women can fight and strive by using manipulative power, like I said, like the neck, right, the neck moving, or coerce influence over her husband, not out of love, but out of pride or out of power or struggle. And she can vacate her role as an ally. Just what we were saying. This is not meant to be gone alone. I think that some women would say that there's a certain appeal to saying, well, that's his job, and his responsibility as the man, and so I'm not going to be an ally and use all of my gifts and talents and abilities to come into this marriage to run at it together. But I'm going to let him figure it all out because that's like his job.
There's a temptation that way. There's a temptation the other way.
I think that's true.
Instead of this mutual honoring, mutual responsibility, mutual flourishing that we're to be about, now it's like, oh, this is yours, this is mine, and we have in society those divisions.
Yeah.
So when Trish and I were first married, we started watching a show that was in a time called Everybody Loves Raymond, and we watched it for a while, and then eventually we decided to stop. Because the marriage portrayed in this couple is, the typical bumbling, complaining, kind of lazy dad, and then the victimized, overworked, resistantly compliant wife.
Who's constantly annoyed.
Who was constantly annoyed with her husband, who was the bumbling idiot, right? And didn't, And it just, as we were looking at this thing, it was not a beautiful thing to look at. It actually caused, we just took on that.
Married, right?
We're trying to figure it out.
Like, how does this married thing work? And we're like, oh, no.
We laughed at it, right? But it actually was kind of ugly.
Yeah, we pulled it up recently and like, oh, we used to watch this. We pulled it up. We're like, oh, I don't want to watch it.
And that's the thing. We can't simply model our marriage after fallen humanity. Right, that's not our call as we follow God. That's not God's design. We can't model our marriages after the sinful stereotypes that the world produces. We have to look to the Scriptures.
So, what does this mean for our marriage that are gifts from God? We talked about how every session we're going to be talking about how our marriages are for freedom, for honoring, and for flourishing. So we have freedom to be ourselves fully, to be present, to be known, and not ashamed. But under this curse, now we experience shame, guilt, loneliness, and we hide. Look at exactly what they did, right? They realized they were naked and they hid from God as if you can hide.
Mm-hmm. And they hide from each other. Now there's this division.
Mm-hmm. And then honoring under this curse, instead we're experiencing competition. We view giving ourselves as an expense instead of just being generous. We want to fight for our fair share rather than develop love. Instead of working together to solve problems as allies, we find ourselves on separate islands, like you said, shooting arrows at each other, playing the blame game. Yeah.
So instead of this honoring, it's like, well, what do I get out of this? Yeah. Or this is not fulfilling me, or right, which totally inverts it on its head from God's intention. Finally, where marriage is meant for God for our flourishing, but when either spouse is not living out their fully created potential, or is limited because of the fallen structures. Well, I'm just supposed to be a lazy dad, or absent dad, the bumbling husband, or the manipulative wife, or the incapable, fragile wife. These are tropes that we encounter, right? We don't flourish under that, right? We flourish when we're mutually honoring, when we both experience freedom, when we both exercise our agency and responsibility that God gives us. And that's when our lives individually and as a marriage, in our families, and really in our world flourish. So here's our situation. Marriage is designed by God as a gift. It's to be experienced and lived into within His designed boundaries and in healthy ways that give and bring freedom, that give honor to each spouse, and that lead to this flourishing we just talked about. But because we live on this side of the fall, where instead of freedom, we experience guilt and shame. Where instead of honoring, we experience this adversarial competition. And instead of flourishing together, we find ourselves starved, if we don't tend to it, of what brings this flourishing, brings this life.
That intimacy.
And
the ally piece.
Right. We experience marriage as competition or not fulfilling me. But we're supposed to be allies in this together.
We're supposed to kind of rage against that.
Right.
That whole concept, right?
Yeah. So how do we move from this fallen marriage structure we all experience to flourishing in marriage? From competition to honoring, from what are the healthy attributes and attitudes that will help our marriage flourish? Well, that's what we're going to look at in the weeks ahead. What does it look like?
So you'll have to come back.
You have to come back, right? Is what are these attributes of what a healthy marriage in a God-honoring way looks like? So, thanks for joining us tonight. We want to leave you with some discussion questions for you and your spouse. Just take a few minutes together and talk about.
Did you want to do the caveats, the reminders?
Go ahead.
Your marriage might not look exactly like ours. It's okay.
Yeah.
These are not salvation issues. What else?
I don't remember.
Look at the first video.
Here's your discussion questions.
Here's your discussion questions. Okay, number 1. What was new to you in this session?
What have you never heard before? What was an observation that you've made? Share that together.
And what did you think about it? Number 2. Like Everybody Loves Raymond, what models of marriage have you seen or have grown up with or around that reflect this adversarial kind of marriage? And what do you think about them?
What is an area in your marriage that has been marked by competition, power struggle, or resentment? How can you move from this place of struggle to being allies together? Last week we talked about you're together and the problem's out here, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than the other person being the problem. Mm-hmm. So what are some areas, we all have them, that have been marked by struggle in marriage, or not being on the same page, or protecting, or, you have yours. How can you move? What does it look like to move to allies in that place?
Well, and we've had ours, right?
Yeah.
And so just bringing that to light, apologizing where there needs apologies, and forgiveness where there needs forgiveness. We will encourage you to do the hard work that we've had to do. And then question number 4, last one, is what's something you can do this week to help your spouse know that you are an ally?
How can you honor your spouse this week, and instead of maybe there's been a place of resistance, move to being allies with your spouse?
And like last week, maybe you wrote down your ideas, and I'm a really visual person, so I would want to write this down so that I can be reminded of it throughout the week. So maybe that's helpful for you.
All right, we'll post those questions for you at the end of this video, and have a great night and great discussions.
And we'll see you back next week.
See you next week.